truly gruesome tales of horror!
But I've always wondered, how did you really die?
I was frightened to death.
By what?
Mrs. Jones's husband.
Where were you?
With Mrs. Jones.
Oh dear. Well, for those of you still with us, we have a real fright in store from Bit Pulp Volume 3. Best leave the lights on, lest you end up like my friend Bob over here.
Oh, it's not so bad, but the headaches are killer.
Miranda Warning by Wayne Abraham. We have walkers on level 2, Jorge Gonzalez said, pointing to the middle of the monitor banks. Chris Millerton sighed and zoomed in on the figures on the Esplanade's upper level. They were a petite brunette in her early 20s, a busty redhead in her early 30s, and a man with a full white beard. Look, it's Santa, laughed Jorge. Not that the man was dressed as Santa. He was wearing black jeans, a black jacket, and a black baseball cap. But he would have done any Santa suit proud. Chris chuckled and pointed to the brunette wearing a top of alternating 4-inch black and white stripes and said, "There's Waldo." Ahab's let him loose without notifying us, Chris said, zooming in on the familiar green Ahab's Coffee whale logo on the clear cup in the redhead's hand. It was half full of some iced coffee concoction. Movement on an adjacent monitor caught Chris's attention. He looked and saw that his partner had zoomed in for a close-up of the redhead's chest. "Jorge!" Chris exclaimed. "What?" Jorge asked, looking at her T-shirt. The front was printed with a pair of polyhedral dice showing the number 20 on top of each and bearing the phrase, "Yes, they're natural." "I don't get it," Jorge complained. Chris shook his head and rolled his eyes. "She's a gamer chick, Jorge. She plays games using character sheets, rulebooks, and 20-sided dice," Chris said to his partner. Jorge still looked confused. "Never mind. We'll call her the natural. Let's let 'em stew a bit. If they complain to Ahab's, maybe the management will come down on their employees for not doing their job," said Chris. "And maybe pigs will fly," Jorge chuckled, watching the group try a set of locked doors. They shrugged, looked at one another, and then wandered off in search of another exit. They were strolling along unconcerned, with Waldo and the natural taking the lead, and slowly outpacing Santa. Chris brushed some of the lint off the rather sinister snake patch of his all-star security provider's jacket. He had been working here at the Esplanade for 9 months. Being the largest mall in a 50-mile radius, the Esplanade was always busy, especially on the weekends, but he wouldn't trade it for anywhere else in the world. An involuntary shiver went down his spine as he recalled the 3 years prior, and he refocused on the security monitors. 10 minutes passed. "They're starting to get a bit spooked," Jorge observed. He was right, Chris noted. Waldo and the natural were walking shoulder to shoulder, and Santa was right behind them. They were walking slower as a close-knit group and making furtive glances around at their surroundings. 20 minutes and 4 locked exits later, Jorge said, "You'd better go give them their freedom." Chris nodded as he donned his jacket and headed for the west end of the Esplanade where the group was currently wandering. He found them just after they tried their 5th locked exit. Putting on a stern business face, Chris said, "You know the mall closed at 9 o'clock?" They all nodded in unison. "That means you're now officially trespassing," Chris declared. Horrified expressions appeared on Waldo and the natural's faces. Santa just looked at him with an alert, neutral expression. Unable to keep a straight face, Chris grinned and said, "I'm kidding. How did you end up here?" "We closed out Ahab," said the natural. "The barista said security leaves an exit unlocked, but it changes every night. So we've been looking for the exit." Chris shook his head in resignation. He said, When they have late customers like you, they're supposed to call us so we can escort you to an exit and let you out. This mall's creepy at night. You don't have any zombies about, do you? Asked Waldo rather grimly. Chris chuckled and replied, No, the Esplanade is as safe as can be. There's no weirdness going on here at all. But, have you been to Miranda High School? I know of it, Waldo said. I attended Manzanita High myself, but a couple of my cousins are at Miranda. I worked there for 3 years prior to coming here, Chris said. I was replacing a friend of mine. He told me to be careful because the school was haunted. I just laughed at him, saying, I don't believe in ghosts. So, where are you folks parked? Oh, down by June Bloom in the parking structure there, said the natural. Then let's head this way, Chris said. I've always heard weird stuff about Miranda High, said Waldo. It's true, Chris said fervently. You won't believe the things I've seen and heard there. I still have trouble believing most of it myself. His mind began to replay events he had tried to forget. Without realizing it, he switched to storyteller mode. One night I was walking by the gym. Thump, 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 thump. Obviously, some kids had broken in, were playing basketball. I checked the door. It was locked. Unlocking it, I opened the door to dead silence. Turning on the light showed an empty gym. Still, I walked through the entire gym. It was obvious that I was the only one there. I exited and locked the door. Thump, 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 thump. It began again. 6 times I unlocked the door and checked out the empty, silent gym. 6 times. As soon as the door was locked, thump, 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 the phantom basketball game began again. I radioed my supervisor to say some kids were playing basketball in the gym. He told me to call the police since I was unarmed. The police arrived with their canine units. They thoroughly searched the gym. They found and heard nothing. The officer in charge chewed me out for wasting their valuable time and told me there'd be consequences if I did it again. As soon as I locked the door, thump, 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 thump began again. Looking him in the eye, I said, That's what I've been hearing all night. He paled as he stared at the gym we both knew to be empty. Then he said, From now on, just leave it be. Just leave it be. Thump, thump, thump. From then on, I followed his advice. The natural said, That is creepy. Lost in thought, Chris nodded slowly as they walked about, absent-mindedly waving to some window dressers working on a store display. I won't even go into the various places where odd smells lingered or with cold spots all year long, he said. Then memories flooded Chris's mind, and he stopped without realizing it. And then there was the laughing skateboarder. He was always in the quad area near the science building. I never saw him, but I would hear the sound of his skateboard. Then it would stop. Mumble, mumble, mumble. Heh, heh, heh. His voice took on an eerie quality as it imitated the skateboarder's laugh. Waldo and the natural were both obviously shaken by the quality of that laugh. Totally lost in thought, he continued quietly. I was standing where I could see the entire quad. It was totally empty. Yet the skateboard continued to ride around the quad, and each time it paused, there was the mumbling and the laughter that felt directed right at me. Chris shivered as the memories took him. Sounds like my cousin, said Waldo with a nervous laugh. I used to park near the golf carts used by maintenance and campus security and take my breaks in my truck. On at least 7 occasions I became aware of a figure dressed in dark sweats and a dark hoodie. It stood 30 feet in front of my truck staring at me. I flipped on my lights and then my high beams. The figure then turned and headed toward the golf carts. I got out of my truck to intercept it. When it got within about 6 feet of the nearest golf cart, the figure vanished into thin air. This elicited a faint gasp from the natural. Needless to say, I started parking elsewhere for my breaks, Chris stated, as he started walking again. I don't blame you, said Waldo. I would have quit at that point. When you have a family to support, you keep on keeping on regardless, Chris answered. But I did ask old Cliff, the guard who had worked there the longest, if he ever heard or saw anything weird while working his shifts. He asked, like people who vanish by the golf carts, basketball games when the gym is empty, odd noises and smells? When I asked how he handled it, Cliff said no one had been hurt by any of the manifestations so far, and he didn't see that changing in the near future. So I stuck with it. At least your breaks were undisturbed after you moved, commented the natural. I wish, Chris said. Now I'd be sitting in my truck on my break and suddenly get the feeling that someone was staring at me, very intently. You know that uncanny feeling that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up? Both of the girls quietly nodded, listening intently. Chris continued. No one was in front of the truck or on either side. Then, in my rearview mirror, I saw someone standing behind my truck. When I opened the door and stepped out, they ran around the other side of the truck and ducked out of sight. I readied my can of mace and walked around the back of the truck to the passenger side. 5 feet away from my truck, whoever it was descending a set of non-existent stairs where there was nothing but solid, flat asphalt. Only its head and shoulders were above the asphalt, and in 5 more seconds the top of its head had vanished from view. This happened 4 different times before I switched parking spots again. Did moving help this time? Asked the natural quietly. Not really, replied Chris as they arrived at the exit. No matter where I parked, there was some kind of weirdness. It's just that some were less disturbing than others. You just pick the ones you can live with and avoid the others. Needless to say, I called my friend up, apologized, and told him the school was haunted. So why did you leave Miranda High? Asked Santa, speaking for the first time. Unwanted, the memories flowed, even though Chris said nothing. He visibly paled, as he remembered how old Cliff had taken to parking in the territory of the rear-end lurker who vanished down the non-existent stairs. As the other guards noticed his health began to decline, old Cliff insisted he felt fine. Then one night, old Cliff vanished. His car was parked in its usual spot, and 5 feet out from the passenger door they found old Cliff's empty guard uniform, with his wallet and keys and shoes in a heap, like old Cliff had walked down a flight of non-existent stairs, but his clothes hadn't been able to follow him. The next day, Chris handed his supervisor his letter of resignation, saying, "Transfer me, or I resign. I can't work at Miranda High another night." Blinking his eyes rapidly to banish some pending tears, Chris shrugged and finally said, "This position opened up, and I took it. Bottom line, stay away from Miranda High School. If you have kids, make sure they attend somewhere else." "For sure," declared Waldo. "Thanks for the warning," said the natural. Chris nodded and said, "This mall is perfectly safe. There's no weirdness anywhere on the grounds. It's a real pleasure to be working here." After unhooking the correct key, Chris looked each of them in the eye and said conspiratorially, "This conversation never happened. If asked, I will deny everything." Suddenly the temperature dropped. Chris felt the hairs on the back of his neck start to rise as Santa nodded knowingly and said, "I understand completely. In fact, we were never here." At those words, all 3 of them vanished completely into thin air. "What the?" exclaimed Jorge in disbelief as he jumped to his feet. He stared at the monitor as the 3 disappeared as suddenly as blown-out candles. He watched as the key fell from Chris's nerveless hand one way and his unconscious body fell the opposite way. Lost on Jorge was the fact that the key and Chris hit the floor at the same time, proving that whatever else was awry, the law of falling bodies was still functioning.
That's the kind of story that stays with you. even after death.
I dated a ghost once.
Really, Bob?
Yes. When I was hungry or needed my head rubbed, she disappeared.
That sounds like my fourth husband. After our honeymoon, he just split.
Into 2 pieces.
Oh, Bob, you're terrible. It was at least 5.
Are you talking pieces or personalities?
I don't know. I lost count. If you're still craving more scary stories, pick up a copy of Terrifyingly Gruesome Tales of Horror. You won't be disappointed, but you don't have to take my word for it.
You can take mine.
Oh, Bob.